I shouldn't have kept the receipts, but something inside me knew I'd need them one day. The night before the pitch, I sat in a foreign hotel lobby that smelled faintly of bleach and cheap cologne, scrolling through screenshots of every email my boss had accidentally left me off of. My suitcase was shoved under the chair, still zipped, because he'd forgotten to reserve me a room. I had a badge that wouldn't scan, a deck I'd spent 6 months perfecting, and a pit in my stomach that said tomorrow was going to be worse than humiliating. If you've ever worked under someone who smiles in public and slices you open in private, you'll understand. He wasn't always like this. At first, he'd asked me for my research, thanked me for saving him time. Then it became, send me your draft, I'll polish it. Weeks later, my name vanished from the title slides, and now here we were, in another country, on the eve of the deal that could change my life. Except he made it very clear it would change his, not mine. I can still hear the jet engines cooling down outside when he leaned across the cab divider and said, "Tomorrow, don't speak unless I tell you to." His tone was casual, like asking for an extra coffee stirrer, but his eyes flicked with something sharper. I hit record on my phone right then, not because I planned to use it, but because I needed proof that this wasn't paranoia. The morning hit like a hammer. I wore the only suit I'd carried through 3 airports, pressed in the bathroom with steam from the shower. My badge failed at the revolving door, so I waited until another delegate pushed through and slid in behind him. My boss was already inside, shaking hands like he'd been born in that marble lobby. He didn't look at me until we reached the conference floor, and then only long enough to whisper, "Stay out here." I thought he was joking. I held the folder, my folder, pressed to my chest like armor. But when I tried to follow, his arm shot across the doorway. "This is my meeting," he hissed, low enough so only I heard. "Say goodbye to your career." Then the door clicked shut in my face. I stood in a corridor lined with frosted glass, my reflection smeared and ghost-like against it. Through the haze, I saw my own slides projected onto a screen. My own phrasing came out of his mouth, muffled but distinct. I backed up until my shoulder hit the wall. It felt like being erased in real time. And then came the part that made me bite down on my lip until I tasted blood. One of the clients turned, looking toward the empty chair where I should have been. They scanned the room, puzzled. My boss gestured casually, filling the space with his voice, and the moment passed. But I saw it. They wanted me there. I should have left, should have booked a ticket home and cut my losses. But humiliation does strange things. It either breaks you or it crystallizes into something sharper. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the emails again, and whispered to myself, "Not today. Not like this." Security arrived 15 minutes later. "Sir, you'll need to wait in the lobby." My boss had called them. He wanted me as far away as possible. I smiled at the guard, handed over my badge, and walked calmly downstairs. My hands were steady, my voice quiet. But inside, something had shifted. If you've ever been cut out by someone who thought they owned your work, you'll want to hear how this ends. Like and subscribe so this story finds you again. Because tomorrow, the same people who shut me out would regret leaving me in the lobby. I used to think red flags came in waves, obvious and loud, the kind you couldn't ignore. But in reality, they arrive like paper cuts. Small, easy to dismiss, until one day you're bleeding from 100 tiny wounds. Looking back, the signs had been there all along. At first, it was credit theft, disguised as collaboration. He'd stroll past my desk with a friendly clap on the shoulder, ask for just a peek at my draft. Hours later, I'd see the same document in his sent folder, my name stripped from the metadata, replaced with his initials. When I confronted him once, he smiled and said, "That's how teams work. Don't worry, you'll get your turn." I believed him. Then came the calendar games. He started scheduling internal syncs with clients that somehow never made it to my invite list. I'd find out only when someone mentioned an update in the break room. Once, he even moved a pitch rehearsal up by a full day, sent the invite to everyone but me, then walked past my desk and said, "Shame you weren't prepared. Maybe next time." I began saving everything. Screenshots of calendar discrepancies, drafts renamed in our shared drive, expense reports mysteriously declined when I tried to book flights. He once claimed the hotel block was full, only for me to see him check in with a room under his name and one under a mysterious guest. My room? Cancelled. No explanation. And then there was the deck. 6 months of research, late nights, endless revisions. I'd built a model so tight even finance complimented it. One evening I stayed late to polish the final slides. The next morning the file had been duplicated, retitled with his initials, and emailed out to senior leadership as such his draft. He even left one of my notes in the speaker's comments. Remember to breathe. That was when I realized this wasn't clumsy mismanagement. It was deliberate erasure. Still, I tried to play the long game. Instead of confronting them, I quietly built leverage. I mirrored every file to a personal archive. I blind copied myself on key emails. I backed up my models on a private drive. If he wanted to rewrite history, I would keep the original text. The most damning evidence came wrapped in politeness. A vendor emailed me late at night. "Thanks again for pushing the sweetener. We'll adjust the margin on our side." Sweetener? I hadn't offered any sweetener. When I asked what he meant, the reply came minutes later. "Sorry, meant to CC, boss. Ignore my note." But I didn't ignore it. I printed it, folded it into my notebook, and highlighted the timestamp. The pattern became unmistakable. My boss wasn't just stealing credit. He was brokering deals that crossed into dangerous territory. Kickbacks, whispered discounts, vendor dinners that never appeared on the official calendar. Twice I saw charges on our shared expense account from a luxury steakhouse in a city neither of us had visited, at least not for company business. I stopped sleeping well. Every night I'd wake at 2 a.m., heart hammering, wondering how long before he cut me out completely. The trip we were on wasn't the first where he'd tried, but it was the boldest. This time he wasn't content with muting me. He wanted me erased. The tipping point came 3 weeks before the flight. A calendar invite popped up for a strategic dinner with the client's CFO. The time? Same night I'd already booked travel to meet them. My invite vanished within an hour. When I checked the guest list, it was just my boss, the CFO, and a mysterious +1 labeled as a consultant. The name was familiar, too familiar. A competitor we'd beaten before. That was the moment I understood the scale. He wasn't just undermining me. He was gambling the company's future for a cut of someone else's profit, and he planned to use my work to do it. I wish I could tell you I blew the whistle right then. But I didn't. I told myself I needed more proof, more leverage. So I smiled in meetings, nodded at his jokes, handed over my drafts with hidden watermarks buried in the metadata. And all the while, I stacked my receipts higher and higher until the pile felt taller than me. 3 weeks later, we were standing in that marble lobby, him blocking me from the boardroom, whispering, "Say goodbye to your career." What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that my career wasn't the one about to end. His was. And the first crack in his facade came not from me, but from the client themselves. Because while he was inside spinning my research into promises he couldn't keep, I received a text from the client's chief counsel. Just 2 words that made me smile for the first time in months. "Call me. Airports are brutal when you're already angry." I dragged my carry-on through 3 terminals, each connection tighter than the last, because my original booking had accidentally been canceled. He rebooked me on a red-eye with a layover in a city not even on the direct route. When I confronted travel services, they apologized politely and said, "Per your supervisor's approval." I didn't argue. I just took a screenshot of the itinerary and added it to my growing file. By the time I landed, my body felt like rubber bands pulled too tight. My boss, of course, had flown direct. He texted me at 6 a.m. local time. "Lobby, be ready." No greeting, no context, just a command. The hotel front desk smiled stiffly when I gave my name. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your reservation was removed?" The word removed hung in the air like a bad smell. I glanced at the screen. His name was there twice. One standard room, one suite. Both charged to the company card. Mine? Gone. I paid out of pocket, took the smallest room left, a shoebox with peeling wallpaper, and pressed my suit in the bathroom steam. I told myself this was temporary. What mattered was the meeting, my slides, my proof. Except the closer we got to the client, the more deliberate his sabotage became. At breakfast, he reminded me not to talk over him. On the cab ride, he asked me to hand over the hard copy of the financial model, just in case Wi-Fi went down. I handed him a duplicate. The real one was already in my bag, time-stamped and watermarked. When we reached the conference floor, my badge beeped red, again. Security looked at me like I'd wandered into the wrong building. My boss swiped his card, breezed through, and smirked as the doors shut between us. He didn't even pretend this time. I waited in the corridor, glass panels frosting my view into the boardroom. Through the haze, I could see the familiar shapes of my slides, the clean gradient title page, the footnotes no one but me bothered to include. He was presenting them like they were his life's work. And the worst part? The clients were nodding, taking notes, listening, until one of them glanced at the empty chair beside him, the seat reserved under my name. Their eyes flicked toward the door where I stood just out of view. They knew. They noticed. My boss laughed, filled the silence, scribbled something on the whiteboard. I leaned closer to the glass, angled my phone just right, and snapped a photo. A reflection caught it perfectly. Him writing numbers on the board, numbers I'd never approved. Discounts that shredded our margins, marketing credits that sounded a lot like bribes. It was my handwriting in his mouth, twisted into something rotten. Then came the final insult. Security returned, tapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Sir, we've been asked to escort you downstairs." I didn't argue. I slipped my phone back into my bag, smiled at the guard, and walked calmly toward the elevator. The humiliation was sharp, but underneath it burned something colder. Clarity. Because just as the elevator doors slid shut, my phone buzzed. A text preview glowed on the screen. "Call me at 7. It was from the client's chief counsel. I stared at the screen, heart pounding not from fear but from opportunity. For the first time in months, I felt the power shift. My boss thought he'd erased me. Instead, he'd pushed me directly into the one conversation that mattered most. So I walked out of that marble building, the morning sun glaring off its glass facade, and I didn't feel small anymore. I felt dangerous. The city looked different at night, like a stage waiting for its curtain to rise. Neon reflected off rain-slick pavement as I walked back from the conference center, the sound of traffic blending with the quiet buzz inside my head. I checked my watch. 6:58. I was standing by the hotel elevators when my phone vibrated. "This line is secure," the client's counsel said, voice low but steady. "Tell me what really happened in that room." I closed my eyes for a moment, replaying everything I'd seen through the frosted glass. My boss scribbling phantom numbers on the whiteboard, promising rebates that weren't in our system, presenting my work as his. I described it all in careful detail. I didn't rant. I didn't vent. I laid out facts like puzzle pieces. On the other end, silence. Then, "We suspected as much. He tried the same tactics before. You've been the only consistent voice. Can you send me your clean model tonight?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. My fingers were already on my keyboard, the glow of my laptop lighting up the dingy hotel desk. I pulled up the file, checked the watermarks, cross-referenced the timestamps. I attached it to an email marked, "For review only," blind copied to my personal archive, and hit send. That should have been enough, but I wasn't done. I drafted a neutral memo, no accusations, just a record of discrepancies. I CC'd compliance back at headquarters, careful to timestamp it, paper trail, locked. When the file sent, I leaned back in the squeaky chair, hands trembling not from fear but from adrenaline. For the first time in months, I wasn't on defense. I was building a case. The next morning, my boss found me in the hotel lobby. His face was red, jaw clenched, tie askew like he hadn't slept. "What the hell did you do?" he hissed, stepping in close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "I don't know what you mean," I said evenly, sipping my burnt lobby coffee. "The client's hesitating," he spat. "They want to pause. That's your fault. You've poisoned them against me." I set the cup down carefully. "They asked questions. Maybe they didn't like your answers." His voice dropped to a growl. "You think you're clever? You're nothing. I built this deal, and you just—" He cut himself off as another guest walked past, eyeing us. His smile snapped back on like a mask. "See you at the office," he said too brightly, and stalked away. But in the elevator that night, he lost his mask again. The doors slid shut, and we were alone. He slammed his fist against the panel. "I told you to stay out of my way. Say goodbye to your career. Again." I didn't flinch. Instead, I glanced at the mirrored wall, where his reflection stared back at him, wild-eyed. "Funny," I said quietly. "Other people are starting to say the same about you." The doors opened, and a sales rep, one who'd overheard more than my boss realized, stepped in. He froze at the tension, then pressed his floor button silently, but I saw the look in his eyes. He'd heard enough. He'd remember. That night, I sat at the desk again, printing 3 hard copies of my memo. I sealed each one in an envelope, labeled them in block letters, Board, Audit, Client Counsel. I stacked them neatly in my bag, right next to my passport, and laid down without bothering to undress. Through the thin curtains, the city lights flickered like signals. My boss thought he'd cut me out. Instead, he'd handed me the knife, and tomorrow I was going to use it. The summons came at dawn. A terse email flagged urgent. Emergency board call. Attendance mandatory. My boss stormed past me in the hotel lobby, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders that sounded more like threats. I followed a few steps behind, calm, my envelopes tucked neatly in my bag. The boardroom felt colder than the marble floors we'd walked on yesterday. Executives dialed in from 3 time zones, faces flickering across wall-mounted screens. My boss launched into damage control the second the call began. "There's been some confusion," he said, voice slick, rehearsed. "The client misunderstood our terms. My associate," he gestured vaguely toward me, "overstepped her role and sent unauthorized material. I'll handle it." For a moment, I thought they might buy it. Then the client's chief counsel spoke, voice clipped. "With respect, what your associate sent us was clear, time-stamped, and fully compliant. What you presented in the room was neither." The silence was thick enough to choke on. My boss opened his mouth, but I leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "If I may," I said quietly, "I'd like to show you something." I pressed play on my phone. 37 seconds of audio filled the room. My boss's voice caught in the corridor, promising marketing funds routed elsewhere in exchange for expedited approval. Perfectly clear, perfectly damning. On the screens, heads snapped up. Compliance unmuted. This matches anomalies we've been reviewing. Vendor dinners, unapproved discounts, unexplained expenses. We traced signatures back to your account. My boss went pale, then flushed crimson. "She set me up," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's been gunning for my job since day 1. This is entrapment." Before I could respond, the sales rep who'd been in the elevator the night before cleared his throat. "With respect," he said softly. "I heard him threaten her myself. Twice. This isn't entrapment. This is a pattern." The board chair's voice cut through like a blade. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending full investigation. Security will escort you out." My boss's mouth worked soundlessly, like a fish dragged from water. He slammed his fist on the table, but no one flinched. The guard stepped in, firm hands on his shoulders. He twisted once, eyes wild, and spat at me. "This isn't over." But it was. Everyone in the room knew it. When the door shut behind him, the board chair turned to me. "We need stability," she said. "Can you salvage this deal?" I met her gaze, steady. "Yes, but it has to be clean, transparent, no shadows." She nodded. "Then it's yours." I slid one of the sealed envelopes across the table, client counsel, and kept the other two in my bag. I didn't need to open them yet. The truth was already out, and the knife was no longer in his hand. It was in mine. The air in the boardroom shifted after he was gone, lighter, sharper, as if everyone had finally exhaled. I opened my laptop, projected the real model, and walked the executives through every line, every assumption, every number. No sweeteners, no shadows, just facts. The client's CFO leaned forward, elbows on the table. "This is the structure we expected," she said flatly. "This is why we were prepared to sign, until yesterday." She tapped her pen once against her notebook. "If you can guarantee this level of transparency moving forward, we're back on." I didn't smile. "Not yet. You'll have everything documented. No more backroom promises, no more changes without your approval." The client's counsel raised a hand. "Put it in writing by close of business, and we'll issue a provisional letter of intent." That was it. Months of late nights, endless revisions, humiliation after humiliation. And suddenly, the deal was alive again. Not because of him, because of me. The board chair glanced around the room. "Motion carried. Effective immediately, she will lead the account transition. Full authority." They waited for me to nod. I did, but inside, a storm of emotions churned. Anger, relief, exhaustion, triumph. By the time I left the building, word had already spread. My phone buzzed with headlines. Senior VP suspended for cause. Finance flagged the unauthorized discounts. Compliance opened a full audit. Vendors linked to the kickbacks were blacklisted. My boss's name, once untouchable, now carried a warning label. And me? I had choices. They offered me his role, his office, his team. But I'd seen too much of the rot from inside. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out the final envelope, board, and slid across the table a folder they hadn't expected, incorporation papers. "I registered a consultancy 6 weeks ago," I said. "If you want this done right, contract us directly. Transparent scope, clean terms, flat fee." There was a pause. Then the chair smiled, thin and sharp. "You planned for this." I met her eyes. "I planned to survive." 3 days later, I signed my first engagement letter as founder and managing partner. The client became my anchor account. The retainer fee? Symbolic. Just $1 taped inside a coin case I keep on my desk even now. Proof that sometimes the smallest token carries the biggest weight. My old boss tried calling once. I didn't answer. The industry didn't either. His name was poison now, whispered in compliance briefings and cautionary tales. He'd wanted me erased. Instead, he erased himself. That night, I walked past my old office. The door was closed, his nameplate already gone. I didn't look in. I didn't need to. My story had already moved on. If you've ever been pushed aside, told you weren't enough, told to say goodbye to your career, remember this. Sometimes that shove is the very thing that sets you free. So if this story gave you even an ounce of strength, hit like, drop your city in the comments, and subscribe. Because there are more stories like mine, and the next one might be exactly what you need to hear.